Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen. Amen. Abana Shabbat Shemayim Kudash Haya Shamka Malak Wav Noah Ratazayan Haya Aisha Ba'arataza Kawa Haya Bashamayam Nathalanawa Lakam Kalyawam Wasalak Nawa Kabwa Wath Nawa Kasalag Nawa Kawab Wath Yanawa Wala Thabay Yanawa Banasayuan Abal Hawashai Nawa Mayan Rakaya Lanawa Hamalakwa Wa'ala Wathapa Arat La'ay Wilam Aman.
I gotta count the joy, ain't no taking it from me. Brothers by my side, can't be done by my lonely. Embracing everything what the Lord got for me. Through the battles and the trials, I'm just telling my story. I gotta count the joy, ain't no taking it from me. Brothers by my side, can't be done by my lonely. Embracing everything what the Lord got for me. Through the battles and the trials, I'm just telling my story. I'm just telling my story.
They say sometimes you gotta smile when you count the joy, cause truthfully nothing amounts to joy. We veterans on battlefields where we survived all of the plots and ploys. Live to arise in early morning and speak life to boys. The small things they say it really matter. Recovering from my letdowns and all the dreams that were shattered. Lost it all and got it back, that's what we call living. Meditate on His compassion, give the offer of thanksgiving. It's brick by brick, it's what it's gonna take to build this building. And every effort's present when we represent for children. Cause we ain't have a God or an image or a script. We was young and hostile and we was riding with a grip. My pops told me it's a price to pay. I counted joy, he saved my life today. No matter what been thrown my way, I'm always keeping faith to obtain this crown. We gotta run this race. So humbly, we approach the throne of grace.
I gotta count the joy, ain't no taking it from me. Brothers by my side, can't be done by my lonely. Embracing everything what the Lord got for me. Through the battles and the trials, I'm just telling my story. I gotta count the joy, ain't no taking it from me. Brothers by my side, can't be done by my lonely. Embracing everything what the Lord got for me. Through the battles and the trials, I'm just just telling my story. I'm just telling my story. Where I'm from, niggas die before diplomas. This body being lent, we not the owners. Devil want your soul, but it's the Lord that's in control. Now I shine through the struggle, that's the light they can't hold. I turn my tears into trophies and these scars full of gold. You directing all my steps, no compass, just faith. But I'm hungry for the knowledge, all I do is scrape plates. And every L is tuition, I'm just learning to count the joy. Invest in my peace because this life be so heavy. It ain't built for the weak. I'm still climbing, but I'm higher than my old views. You can't believe them lies and everything they told you. I eat the whole roll, I call it soul food. Gotta count the joy, you can't count the hurt. I die daily, a new man risen from the dirt. I put the Lord first, you better know your worth. Cause some spend their life, but they stay the same. These days I smell like a diamond. Gotta count the joy, ain't no taking it from me. Brothers by my side, can't be done by my lonely. Embracing everything what the Lord got for me. Through the battles and the trials, I'm just telling my story. Gotta count the joy, ain't no taking it from me. Brothers by my side, can't be done by my lonely. Embracing everything with those in the trials, I'm just telling my story. I'm just telling my story.
You facing the fire and you feeling the heat. Count it all joy, take a seat, the Most High is undefeated, my brethren. The scripture is the truth and not a myth. Trials hit hard, my God, but it comes with a gift. The test of your faith, you gotta stand up and grow. Don't let the pressure take over, just let the spirit flow. It's an opportunity, not a setback. Understand? James 1 verse 2, that's the Father's command. Every tribulation's a setup for a praise. You unlocking new levels in these perilous days. The enemy brain struggle, but God bringing strength. Dear Lord, I pray that my soul that you keep. So when troubles get heavy, stand firm in your spot. It's refining you to gold. Now look what you got. Embrace the affliction. Keep your mind on the goal. Let patience have a perfect work. Watch God save your soul.
All right. Shalom. Yo, good night, man. I wasn't expecting to hear you, man. Yo, good to have you on the brothers, man. It was a fire-ass track. I like the new music, man. Yes, sir. Good brother. Good night. Shalom, man. I heard the last one. I'm like, yo, was that good night? I just texted General Gabaryam, man. A fire track, man. The singing and the rapping and the beat is smooth, easy going, go hand in hand. All praises for the new music, man. The variety in it, it's worth a listen to. I wasn't even expecting that. Good brother, Bafai. Shalom, sir. Shalom up. Shalom to everyone in the chat. Shalom. Gonna get started soon. Sure, so now that was chill out, Yashar. Nathan, come on. Nathan, get out of here, man. Nathan said he wrote the verse. Love sis Hadah, shalom, sis. Sis Zaya's in the building, shalom. Oh, man. Shalom to everyone. Give me a second. Okay. All right. So all of you see the title to the lesson, the Maccabean Era. We'll change it after. We're going to go into, or excuse me, the Hellenistic Era. That's actually the title of the class. I don't know why it says that up there. So we have dedication coming up this Saturday, as all of you know, to the world that's known as Hanukkah. In the Hebrew, it is Hanukkah. We know it as the feast. The Feast of Dedication is very important to the Israelite nation because it is a dark time of the persecution and the vigorous implementation of Greek culture and everything pertaining to Greek life and the Greek way of life, vigorously, unmercifully put upon the Israelite, or excuse me, the Jews at that time, the southern kingdom that was left in the land, and that came back after the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BC. We need to understand how important this time period is, because had it not been for the Lord raising and rising up a righteous remnant that was left amongst our nation, we would not be here today. But throughout the aisles of time, there's always been a righteous remnant that the Lord has kept and preserved to himself and has used to uphold his righteousness and hold to the traditions of our fathers that meant keeping the law, statutes, and commandments given by the lawgiver and prophet himself, Moses. But we have to understand about the day of the week of dedication, and how important this holy day is that it reminds us that when we think that we're finished, when we're outnumbered, when we're outmanned, when we're out weaponized, outgunned, if you will, the Lord has always made a way and delivered his people. So we understand that the Lord really pulled through for his people in this time, even when we deserved it, even when we were in captivity, and even when, despite there being a righteous remnant, there are always that sect of Israelites that always wanted to go astray. Always. You know, the Israelites today have that same mentality. You know, let's leave off from following off the Lord because we've had much sorrow since we've left the heathen. So, with that being said, what we're going to do now, I have a presentation for all of you I'm going to share. And I'm going to have also audio. All right. All right. Can all of you see this? Can all of you see this? Compana. All right, you guys can see the presentation. Oh. It's not it. All right, there we go. All right, so this is a presentation on the Hellenistic age. Today is December 10th. Before we get to Maccabees, before we get to the New Testament, we have to understand that when we're talking and teaching amongst ourselves, whether you're talking to one of our own, that be of the nation of Israel, or whether you're talking to a non-Israelite, Edomite, whoever it is, understanding the scriptures from the historical perspective is so imperative and so significant that not having it will help you read the Bible just blindly. And it's important to realize that without it, you will not have the crucial understanding you need to really see in depth of what's important and what matters in the scriptures, right? So this is the Hellenistic age. This is Alexander the Great, also known as Alexander the Homo. He was the one that set forth the conquering of the Persian Empire near the ending of the 4th century BCE. He is also the one that is responsible for setting forth the standard and the wave of the establishment of Greek authority, the way of life, their customs, their language, so on and so forth, after Darius III was overrun in the continual conquest all throughout the empire. What we have to understand is that him not just being an Edomite, and this is now when Esau began to first be in power in the ancient world on a global scale. He also left everywhere they conquered and went their way of living and their way of life with them, reaching as far as India, which I believe from Greece is over 2 million square miles, which is very, very far. So he was from Macedon. He's a Macedonian. Greece was not just one whole united country. Greece was made up of separate city-states that made up the entirety of Greece. So you have Macedonia up here. You have Thessaly. There's more important cities. You have Thermopylae. This is where Xerxes had the battle at 480, 479 BC, but failed. You have Delphi. You have Mycenae. You have Argos. You guys see Athens. Athens is very important in Greece. You have Laconia. You have Sparta, also important. The Lacedaemonians were here. And then you have Thrace in the upper right corner over here. This is the map of ancient Greece. I wanted to kind of make it explode the picture. That way you guys could all see, how it looked in ancient time before all of it was united underneath Philip II, who was Alexander's father. And then once he was assassinated, Alexander took over after him. All right, so this is much more of a clear map. Alexander the Great and continuing. So all of you see again, you see Macedonia here on the left. You see all of the Greek city-states. You see Thebes, Athens, it's Corinth, Sparta. And then what this map is showing, the great Alexander's route from 334 BC, once he came to the throne. You see the green, where he primarily took all of his routes at when he was conquering. Craters and Nearchus are his generals. When they were leaving India, they were going all the way back and planned to go back, I believe it was, to Babylon to meet, because it was the economic center of his empire at the time. And this is his empire currently all covered in orange. Right? So all of you can see the dates, all of you can see the areas. He came down to Egypt. He named Alexandria there, of course. We're going to get into that into the slides moving forward shortly. Everywhere he went, of course, you can see it all outlined on the map. Gaugamela right here, one of the famous battles. Isum was also another one. You have Carmania, that's ancient Iran. This is the area where Cyrus the Great was from. This is where the Persian Empire, the heartland of it, is at. You see Parthia, another Israelite nation that would give hell to the Romans, that would be fighting against them. And everywhere he went, he named his name, he put everywhere he went. You see Alexandria of the Aryans, Alexandria in Caucaso, Alexandria, Kandahar. Bucephala. Bucephalus was the name of his horse, so he actually named one of the cities after his horse. You see Alexandria here again, Nicaea. There goes another Alexandria. So everywhere he went, there's another one up here. Alexandria, shape. So everywhere he went, he continued to keep naming places after himself, and everywhere he went, he made sure to leave his mark. And again, I want to emphasize, they left everywhere the Greeks conquered and went, they spread their way of life and living with them. Again, shalom, shalom to those coming in. After this presentation be in the file. Absolutely, I'll send it in the chat for everyone. Sis, can you get that? Absolutely, sis. Good brother, Yabayan's in the chat. Shalom, sir. All right, so in continuing, so now you guys have the geographical location and all of the city names and everything like that where he conquered. All of you remember this. All of you remember this. Daniel chapter 2, the importance of the statute. All of you should know this. All of you remember this. We know the head of gold is Babylon. The chest and the arms of silver is Medo-Persia. The belly and thighs of bronze is Greece. The legs of iron is Imperial Rome. The feet in the iron clay, Ecclesiastical Rome, from 538 onwards. And then you have the stone representing the second coming of Christ. He said, I am the chief cornerstone upon which the foundation of the church and the 12 disciples were built upon. So we are now currently in this era right now. The belly and thighs of bronze. If you guys notice, it's covering the lower portion. And, you know, looking at this image and picture, because the Greeks are very much sexually perverted in their practice and way of life, I get why they're the belly and the thighs, the lower mid-abdomen, you know, genitalia area, because of how sexually perverse these people are. So even within the symbology of the statue, you can see how the statue denotes that the Greeks, naturally being bisexual, if you want to put it in today's terms, were also a multi-sexual, cultural, pederastic society. A pederast being an adult male that has the lifestyle and infatuation of having relationships and sexual relationships with younger males, that is. All right. So again, we know the breakdown in Daniel chapter 2. We are now currently in the belly and thighs of the bronze, which is Greece. Alexander is the he-goat from the west. We have to keep that in mind. He is the he-goat from the west that Daniel chapter 8 goes into, and furthermore into that breakdown pertaining to the Maccabean era and what's to take place and happen and occur. You should know this breakdown. Daniel chapter 7. The leopard with many spots that is four-headed with four wings. The four different directions, north, south, east, west, and the four generals that promptly rose after him and divided his empire amongst themselves. Basically, survival of the fittest and the strongest of the fittest that gain the empire. We're going to see that shortly, but the point of it is that one beast, but four heads, but many spots, representing that the Greeks conquered over many peoples, again, over the 2 million square miles that Alexander covered from Greece all the way to India in the prior picture that I showed before. So that's what this picture here represents. We know the breakdown, again, the leopard with many spots, 4 representing his generals, 4 representing the directions. So with that being said, this map was a little bit minimized from the prior one, and these are the 4 directions. To the south, you have Ptolemy in Egypt. To the east, you have Seleucus. those are the two most important ones of his generals that came after Alexander that are very important and pivotal in our history. The others not so much, because not that they don't have anything to do with the Greeks, but they don't have anything to do with our history. His other general, Lysimachus, that pretty much took all of Anatolia, which is Turkey and the surrounding Greek islands, if you will. And then you have Cassander, who was the general and the man he left in charge after he went away conquered. So those four, they're the generals. But Lysimachus and Cassander are not as important as Seleucus and Ptolemy, with Seleucus gaining the biggest proportion of the whole empire. So you have the south, you have the east. Seleucus more a little bit towards the north as well. And then you have Lysimachus and Cassander to the west. All right. Seleucus the first Nicator was born in 358 BC and died in 281 BC. This particular one is the one mentioned inside the book of Maccabees that are our enemies and that were persecuting us. And through his line, his father, if you guys didn't know, when you guys read Antioch in the scriptures, Antioch is in Syria. Antioch is the father of Seleucus the first. So they, of course, they had the common tradition and practice of naming their sons after their fathers and passed down, so on and so forth, so on and so forth, so on and so forth. So Antioch is the father of this man here, Seleucus the first Nicator. Antioch, his father, was actually a general in Philip II's army. Philip passes away, he's assassinated. Antioch eventually passes away, but Seleucus grows up as one of Alexander's generals in the army. And of course, establishing himself through the Diadochi Wars that happened after Alexander generals split up and warred one against another to claim territorial lands after he had died over his empire. Seleucus the first Nicator, in the prior picture that we saw, gained the biggest proportion of all four generals. So Antioch in Syria, he named after his father. So Antioch was not only his father, but Antioch is also the main trading and industrial capital of the Greek world in his empire at the time. And throughout the Roman times, it was the third most populous city in all of the Roman Empire. So that's where their headquarters was. So when you also read that within Maccabees, Antioch is in Syria. That was his established headquarters, that is. Absolutely, come on, absolutely, he did. That is not a lie. He didn't hold back either. So, with that being said, this is the most important one out of all his generals, and then you have the second most important. You have Ptolemy the first Soter, born in 367 BC, died in 283 BC. You have Ptolemy the first. He took Egypt, and if I remember correctly, Josephus had actually recorded that before he went down to Egypt, he came to the Jews on the Sabbath day, and of course, we didn't fight at the time. We didn't make the decree to. He massacred, killed, and enslaved and took away a lot of the Jews to Egypt. If you guys didn't know, which is why there was a population of us there in the first place. And then he also took Alexander's coffin and grave back to Egypt, where he was buried, I believe, in Alexandria. And he was also one of Alexander's lifelong friends. So he's actually one of the people, or one of the few generals that actually lived, that grew up with Alexander when he was a young man. What else can I say about it? Oh, and another fact. Alexandria was the booming, if you will, educational, intellectual capital of the world during this time that Ptolemy and his descendants were reigning in Egypt as well. And particularly, it is Ptolemy II Philadelphus, which is where Philadelphia comes from, brotherly love, is the one that had the 70 scholars come down to Egypt and translate the Torah at the time into Greek. So his descendants, particularly Ptolemy II, is the one that's responsible for that. Ptolemy I Soter. So again, according to the map, these two men are the most important of the four. The first one being Seleucus, the second one being Ptolemy. So when we're reading Ptolemies and Seleucids inside the Apocrypha, that's where these two men are the progenitors of those lines. All right. The spread of ancient Hellenism began in earnest with Alexander the Great's conquest, beginning from 334 to 323 BC. That's when he died. And formally marks the start of the Hellenistic period from 323 to 31 BCE. That's when the Romans conquered and took over Egypt from Cleopatra and officially were the rulers of now what was once the Greek Empire. A time when Greek culture, language, and influence spread across the Middle East, Egypt, and Asia, blending with local traditions after his death and continuing through successor kingdoms. The Greek Empire. Alexander's massive vast territory from Greece all the way to India, again, 2 million square miles. In the successor kingdoms after Alexander's death in 323 BCE, his generals, the Diadochi, carved up his empire, establishing powerful Hellenistic dynasties from the Ptolemies in Egypt, the Seleucids in Asia, and Antigonids in Macedon that all promoted Greek culture. Cities like Alexandria became vibrant centers of learning, art, and commerce, spreading Greek ideas and lifestyles. That is the Alexandria in Egypt. All right, the Greek Empire and Hellenism. We have to define these terms. Hellen. Hellen is the mythological ancestor of all Greeks. He is the legendary ancestor of all Greeks who are called Hellenes in his honor. Hellenism is the devotion to or an imitation of ancient Greek thought, customs, or styles. It can also be defined as the term used to describe the influence of Greek culture on the peoples the Greek and Roman empires conquered or interacted with. I included the Roman Empire as well, because the Romans actually took a lot of religious and cultural things from the Greeks and revamped it in their own way, which is why in the prior classes pertaining to the days of the week and time, they have a Greek correlation and a Roman correlation with their gods. The Greek this is the Roman that. The Roman this is the Greek that. So there's a reason why the correlation is there within history and within time, is because they also adopted and assimilated a lot of what was Greek into their own culture. Hellenistic. Hellenistic refers to the historical period from 323 again, BCE to 31 BCE, and the culture that spread Greek influence across the East after Alexander the Great's conquest, blending Greek traditions with local Eastern cultures, resulting in vibrant developments in art, science, philosophy, and new cosmopolitan societies, characterized by realism, emotional depth in art, and widespread cultural exchange until Rome's rise. Hellenization. Hellenization is the spread and adoption of ancient Greek culture, language, philosophy, and customs by non-Greek peoples. Emphasis on non-Greek peoples. Allegedly. All right, the biblical use and understanding. So we just went over what happened when Alexander began to start conquering the world. I've showed all of you the map. I've shown all of you and explained through his two generals in the division of his empire everything that's taken place and what happened after he died and what happened and what took place. Inside the scriptures, in G1672, which is Helen, these are the Strong's definitions. It is a Greek either by nationality, whether a native of the mainland or of the Greek islands or colonies, which is the east to Turkey. Also, in the wider sense, the name embraces all nations, but not Jews, that made the language, customs, and learnings of the Greeks their own. The primary reference is to a difference of religion or worship. Now, there's two things that's wrong with this, because again, the concordance is not an infallible tool. It is a helpful and useful tool, but it's not always right and correct when it comes to defining things and breaking down terms. And here's why. It says also in the, this is from the concordance. This is not my own definition again, so that you guys understand. Also in the wider sense, the name embraces all nations, but not Jews. The problem with the concordance and why this actually helps, you know, people that say, well, Gentiles and the other nations can be saved and will be given salvation, is that, number one, we know the history because Jews actually did embrace Greek culture and nationality and also did speak Greek. And the reason why it doesn't embrace Jews is because of the Maccabees fighting back against the vigorous Hellenization enforcement that was going on at the time. So it actually goes both ways, but this definition is incorrect. More importantly, there's not much more of a formal explanation behind it, because the apocryphal history is discluded out of the fact that we didn't become Greeks by choice or chose to speak Greek by choice because of the Maccabees and those that chose to hold on to the law and were zealous for it, as Mattathias the priest and his 5 sons were, and those that joined them, but also because of the fact that there were willingly Jews that when Antiochus gave out the decree, many Israelites consented wickedly that they wanted to go and join the heathen and follow after the customs, the ways of life of the Greeks. Some of them even a lot of them even undid their circumcision to literally become Greek. All right, G1675, Hellenistes. It is one that is a Hellenist, one who imitates the manners and customs or the worship of the Greeks and uses the Greek tongue. It is used in the New Testament of Jews born in foreign lands and speaking Greek. So all of you see here how this is a straight contradiction from G1672, because it says also in the wider sense the name embraces all nations, not Jews. Well, how is that the case when the Hellenists can also fit the description of one that is a Jew born in foreign lands and speaking Greek? We're going to continue. Don't worry. I have more. Don't worry. Clearly and without question, Jews can be referenced as Greeks just as well as Gentiles due to the fact that the Hellenistic, due to the fact that during the Hellenistic era, they were following after and imitating the customs of the Greeks. These are some scriptures to help us understand. John 7:35. The Jewish leaders were puzzled by this statement. Where is he planning to go, they asked. Is he thinking of leaving the country and going to the Jews in other lands? Maybe he will even teach the Greeks. You can also look into different translations. I didn't want to go through them too much, but I will say it even says, will he go amongst the diaspora that are living amongst the Greeks? Who's the diaspora? We know in 2 Peter 1, those that are scattered abroad, the elect, are Israelites. Acts 6:1 in the NIV. In those days, when the number of the disciples was increasing, the Hellenistic Jews among them complained against the Hebraic Jews because their widows were being overlooked in the daily distribution of food. But I thought a Jew could not be Hellenistic or a Hellen according to the concordance definition. That is not true. How, if that's the case, when there were Greek-speaking Jews amongst these, as this verse says, Hebraic Jews, but they're quarreling one amongst another? Acts 9 and 28 to verse 29 in the NLT. Saul, speaking of before he became Paul, so Saul stayed with the apostles and went around Jerusalem with them, preaching boldly in the name of the Lord. He debated with some Greek-speaking Jews, but they tried to murder him. You know what's interesting? How was Paul able to speak with Greek-speaking Jews? Because being born in Tarsus, having Roman nationality, he was able to speak Greek himself. But was Paul a Hellenistic Jew? No, because he was brought up in the law by Gamaliel, who was a doctor in the law, raised amongst the strictest sect, being a Pharisee. But he was also one that was able to speak Greek, talking and speaking amongst his own people to his own brethren. Does that make sense? Again, you guys could actually look these up in the different translations, and it's going to cut right to the point. Well, this is speaking on other nations and other peoples. No, this is us talking to one another, but those guys are speaking Greek, and we don't identify with them because they haven't been born in this land, and they're not keeping the laws and the traditions like we have been, and we never left. We never converted. We never gave in to the Greek way of life and fashion. We didn't follow after the heathen like they did. This is the same exact story and storyline unfolding right as we're reading. As we read about in Maccabees, because the quarrel wasn't just with the Greeks, it was also civil war and us fighting amongst ourselves, because it was those that were zealous to keep the law, to inherit and follow after the promises given unto our fathers. And then there were those that willingly said, we've left the heathen and have much sorrow since leaving them. Let's follow after the Greeks. You're seeing this same quarrel play out hundreds of years later in the new era where Christ is actually living in. This is in the Gospel of John, Acts after the death of Christ, and then him ascending into heaven in the chariots, and then this is during the commission of the apostles. All right, and that is it for this. That is it for this. All right, so now what I'm going to do. Let me exit out of that. All right. All right. More proof that the Israelites identified as Greeks and wanted to be. One scripture, 2 Maccabees chapter 4 and verse 9. This is speaking on Jason, who was the brother of Onias, the high priest, that we read about in 2 Maccabees. Onias was a righteous high priest, following after the law. He was unfortunately put to death, of course, underneath persecution. So in 2 Maccabees chapter 4 and verse 9, this is Jason. What he's doing is giving off a payment to Antiochus, the king, that made the implementation and set forth the agenda for everyone to follow after the Greek way of life and customs and culture. So this is 2 Maccabees chapter 4 and verse 9. It says, he also promised to pay another 8,550 pounds of silver if he were permitted to set up, under his own authority, a gymnasium in a place for training the young people and to enroll those living in Jerusalem as citizens of Antioch. The DRA, besides this, he promised also 150 more if he might have license to set him up a place for exercise, a place for the youth to entitle them that were at Jerusalem, speaking of the Jews, Antiochians. So, why am I reading this? To show that Israelites not only willingly embraced following after the ways of Greek culture, custom, and fashion, and speaking it, but also to show that we need to understand and realize when we're reading the New Testament or we're reading about Greek-speaking Jews or Hellenized Jews, that is, this was already beforehand, before the New Testament's in place. It's just the only difference is it's the same people in power being Esau, just a different name by the Romans. Kaganan, when I first read this chapter and got the understanding, I didn't look at Olympics the same. Yep. Why do they have different amounts for each version? They're estimating it according to ancient currency. I'm not going to try to guess which one's right, which one's wrong, but they're making guesstimated amounts according to each translation. But, you know, the emphasis I wanted to put on it was that the citizens, Jason wanted to enroll the Jews living in Jerusalem, of course, the capital city, as Antiochians or as citizens of Antioch. Again, he wanted to have them Hellenized after the way of life and manner of the Greeks. So again, we're seeing and reading from this particular scripture about what Hellenism really is. All right. Shout out to the brother Yahawashi. Shout out to him. Get the source. All right. So this book is from, I just took screenshots because I'm going to read it. This is from the Encyclopedia of the Jewish Diaspora. This is page 9. Okay. All right, this should be good for you guys. I'm going to read just these two big paragraphs here. You can use either one, Ganan. That's just a simple explanation for it. It's just important to just put the significance on the fact that he wanted to enroll them as Greeks. Sharda period lasted for approximately 323 to 354 years before the birth of Paul the Apostle. All right, so again, this book is explaining in these beginning pages about the diaspora during the Hellenistic era, Alexander, and from his death, the split of his empire amongst his four generals. The diaspora in the Hellenistic period, to simply read, a further strong common denominator was the linkage, to the Holy Land and the temple and its institutions. The Jewish diaspora, in whatever place outside the Holy Land, never gave up the longing, even if just sentimental and theoretical, to become again a reassembled national entity in the land of Israel. This is a central element in Jewish theology in the diaspora and antiquity, which does not necessarily contradict the extent to which Jews were syncretistic in their organizational systems and spiritual life. Recently, it has been argued that the Jews in the Hellenistic diaspora, who were Greek-speaking Jews, had no desire to return to the Holy Land and gradually lost touch emotionally and physically with it and its Jews, as well as their Holy Bible. Moreover, the Jews in the Hellenistic diaspora, according to this view, lived safely and in relative security, and they did not suffer attacks from their Gentile neighbors. This claim cannot be accepted because, in the first place, there is clear evidence for sporadic attacks against Jews, physical as well as verbal. Second, the Jews were always attached in one way or another to their Bible and via the Bible, as well as other traditions, to their land. In many other regions of the diaspora as well, the Jews kept a very strong Jewish identity, a matter that can be deduced from the writings of Gentiles about them. All right, we go to the bottom. So, the Jewish world during the Hellenistic period was notably dispersed. Most of the scholars who have dealt with the Jewish diaspora, again, you guys can look at those different translations because the diaspora is referring to the Israelite nation, particularly the Jews in this case, but, you know, Paul being sent out amongst the Gentiles and those that were lost amongst the world at that point, and the joining of the two sticks, beginning with his ministry and him being sent forth. It would definitely apply to all tribes, but it's saying the Jewish diaspora here. who have dealt with the Jewish diaspora during this period have blurred the distinction between the Eastern and Western Jewish diasporas, explicitly or implicitly assuming that the knowledge about one diaspora could inform the other. However, the distinction between the two diasporas was not only geographic, but it also reflected a much more substantive split. The centrality of Jerusalem in the land of Israel as a unifying force was a significant factor in the Jewish world before the destruction of the temple, but this was much less so after the destruction. If all of you remember, when Solomon prayed in 1 Kings, you have to remember the reason why this was so central to the nation was because Solomon prayed in the temple that no matter where we were or what state of predicament and condition we were in, if we prayed unto the Most High, he would hear, particularly the prayer he made was in the temple. And more importantly, was for those scattered abroad. Of course, because we would become, in the future time, a reference and point strangers. However, the centrality of Jerusalem in the land as a unifying force was a significant factor in the Jewish world before the destruction of the temple. But this was much less so after the destruction. After the destruction, the spirit that grew in its wake, the language difference between the East and the West strengthened this divide. In the West, namely the Greek-speaking Mediterranean world, the Jews wrote and spoke only Greek, whereas in the East, Palestine, in Judea, I'll say, and eastward, Hebrew and Aramaic prevailed, although even there some communities wrote and spoke Greek. The land of Israel served as the border between the two diasporas. Slow down here. All right. The language gap between these two diasporas led to a much deeper cultural gap, which in turn led also to a normative gap. In fact, the accepted scholarly claim that the rabbis in the center, that is, in the land of Israel, maintained contact with the entire Jewish diaspora, including its Hellenistic part, should be refuted as a consequence of recent research. There are clear and unequivocal proofs that this connection existed with the Eastern Aramaic-speaking diaspora, with regard to the Western diaspora, as a deafening silence on this issue prevails in Jewish sources. The gap can be explained by a widening abyss between the Eastern and Western Jewish diasporas. So now, why am I going into all this, and why am I explaining this? Because when we read in Acts 6:1 about the quarrel that was going on, this is why it was happening. This is why there was a divide. This is why they were, not getting along. This is why there were problems. This is why all of this was taking place, And it has to be understood that because we were split, because one spoke Greek and one was holding on to the original language, laws, and customs, the animosity began to be built because you're the traitors or you're the sellouts, you fell away, or you're not one of us, compared to those that stayed in the land. And well, we've been holding on to this, and you guys, you could have held it down, and you were born somewhere else, and you're looked at and you're cast out. As it's been broken down before, by the Elder Pranan, the Captain Yawasop in classes prior, and it's to be understood. This mentality and this split is what Paul was speaking of and talking about in Romans 11, because it was amongst our own that this was happening, and this is where all of this stems from. So that's what this the book is explaining about the diaspora, particularly because we have to understand that this occurring and taking place is what we have to understand before getting into the New Testament. So this conflict, this strife was already present way before we even get the New Testament. Sharp put, to show the duration of how long our people were assimilated into Greek culture, absolutely. Yashar said, were there any Northern Kingdom around during the Hellenistic period? I could only tell you from you asking that out that Josephus had the letter that the Samaritans wrote saying that they weren't brethren and weren't related to the Jews, which were definitely Northern Kingdom. How can I put it? What's the word to use? They discluded themselves in any way, shape, and fashion from making it seem like there was a connection or there would have been an alliance between them and Southern Kingdom, i.e., being the Jews, because of the persecution that was happening and going on when Antiochus was persecuting Jerusalem and had his generals and his enforcements go down into the land and kill and persecute the people, carry them off, so on and so forth. I can't say particularly that there was. I'm not going to say there wasn't, but I will say the Northern Kingdom easily gave in, and I believe the temple that they had on Mount Gerizim, they named it the Temple of Jupiter. No, you're not wrong, Ganun. A good remnant of them were carried away, but there was just a small portion of them left. Because remember, the Gentiles that came in 2 Kings 17 said that they needed priests of the land in order to actually live there and to know the law and know what to do. So some of the people were, I believe, brought back into the land because it couldn't just be the heathen in God's territory that he gave his people. The bad blood that spilled from us at So to continue reading, this is the bottom of page 12. The family customs that were text-based, such as the Passover Haggadah, could not therefore reach the Hellenistic Jewry. It is specifically this area of the normative system which was adopted in the Eastern diaspora, as in the land of Israel, that could not reach the Western Jewish diaspora because of the communication and language barrier. After the destruction, when the leaders of the Jewish community in the land of Israel were struggling for their future survival, the normative gap between the community in the land of Israel and in the community in the Western Greek-speaking diaspora developed into an almost ideological gap just because the Jews in the West remained strictly biblical in their halakhic behavior. If all of you remember, the Elder Panay had gone into the halakha Jews, the Jews of the way. That's what halakhic means. So they stuck to the law and stuck to what was written in the scriptures. In spite of attempts to show that the Jews in the Western diaspora knew Hebrew, it is common knowledge that they basically knew only Greek. The Jews of the West knew neither Hebrew nor Aramaic, and their religious lives, including the reading of the Torah and prayer, were conducted solely in Greek. The Torah was translated into Greek in the 3rd century BCE, and there were attempts at translation even before that. In subsequent centuries, and the rest of the Hebrew Bible translated as well. It should be pointed out that in certain, go to the bottom here, it should be recognized and pointed out that in certain rabbinic circles, the translation in the Greek was viewed as a necessity of the times. The sages recognized that there were entire diaspora communities that spoke only Greek, and that these would be lost to the Jewish people in the absence of an authentic translation. All right. It says, while the sages struggled to preserve Hebrew as the sole language for religious activity, that is prayer and Torah study, they simultaneously provided for an authorized translation of the scripture for the Greek-speaking communities. Again, so when we read Grecians in the scriptures, as we read in Acts 6:1, that's speaking about Hellenistic Jews that speak Greek. They weren't all the way Hellenists because they were in the synagogue amongst the other Jews, but you can see the quarrel and strife. And again, what this book is providing on this information is it's providing the background and the backdrop you need to understand about why, when you're reading the New Testament, there was issues between the Jews and there was a strife and conflict between the Jews and the Hellenistic Jews. What scripture? Can I quote the scripture? It was Acts 6:1 and Acts 9:28 to verse 29 about the Grecian Jews, or excuse me, about the Hellenized Jews. Again, Acts 6:1 and Acts chapter 9 and verse 28. All right. Now for an article, 2 articles. All right. All right. The hell in Hellenism. Should be legible for you guys. Greek culture slowly infiltrated Jewish culture, threatening to destroy the Jewish people in ways tyrants could not do through brute force. After the death of Alexander the Great, the Greek Empire and the Mediterranean basin divided into two main sectors. The Northern Empire, which included Syria and Turkey, which was then Asia Minor, and Greece itself, was under the domination of a general called Seleucus, and therefore called the Seleucid Empire. The Southern Empire, which was basically Egypt and Africa, was under the domination of a general called Ptolemy. Again, he's the one responsible for the translation of the scriptures into Greek in the 3rd century BCE, which became known as the Septuagint. The water was regarding the Assyrians absorbing the northern kingdom. 2 Kings chapter 17. Good night. 2 Kings chapter 17. Continuing, the Southern Empire, which was basically Egypt and Africa, was under the domination of a general called Ptolemy. These kingdoms would rule the Mediterranean world until Rome. So again, that's why they are the most important of the two generals, because Israel was between both the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, and throughout secular history, we were underneath the rulership and the subjection of either one or the other, and they both had wars one against another that were known as the Syrian wars that they often fought through their descendants afterwards. So Alexander's generals didn't just fight in the wars after he died, the wars of the Diadochi. The Seleucids and the Ptolemies also fought one against another in what was known as the Syrian wars, which may have included other Greek powers at the time, in their own lines amongst one another. So sandwiched between them, Egypt and the Seleucid Empire, was the land of Israel. When the two empires were at peace with each other, there was a lot of trade to be had. However, when there was war, it was a very dangerous place to be. For various reasons, Jews favored the Southern Empire, the Ptolemaic. They had a fascination with Egypt since their original sojourn there, and the large Jewish community in Alexandria also provided a kinship with them. Again, I want to emphasize, glad Josephus recorded it. Ptolemy the First slaughtered and killed Jews on the Sabbath and carried them captive away into Egypt. We didn't go there by choice. The grandeur of Jewish Alexandria. At its height, Alexandria was the most wealthiest, most powerful, most influential, and most sophisticated Jewish community. The Talmud describes a synagogue of immense proportions that the community built. Jewish artisans of Alexandria each had their own section in the synagogue. The goldsmiths sat in one section, the silversmiths in another, and the carpenters in the third. Josephus writes that a synagogue was like an amphitheater. It had 8,000 to 10,000 seats. It was so large that people in one part could not hear the service taking place in the same room in another part. So in order to answer amen, they raised flags and waved. I'm going to read down. I'm going to go down. This particular portion. Here we go. The Hellenists. About the year 200 BC, there arose among the Jewish population of a group called the Misvaim, the Misyavnim, meaning the Hellenists, who adopted the Greek culture as a way of life to such a degree that almost invariably they gave up their Jewish culture and identity. For instance, the Greeks were great believers in nudity. Does it make sense again why they have the lower abdomen and the groin area? Their sports were done in the nude, which is why gymnos in the Greeks means naked. Their bathhouses were attended in the nude. In the ancient world, the Jews and some Arabs were the only people who were circumcised. Thus, if you wanted to be a good Greek, you were embarrassed to go to the bathhouse or participate in sports. Consequently, Hellenized Jews underwent painful operations at a time with minimum anesthetics to restore their foreskin in the pure Greek. That's disgusting. Imported along with the Greek language, customs and sports were Greek idols and modes of worship. Again, going back to 2 Maccabees 4:9, Jason, the brother of Onias, the high priest, wanted to make a gymnasium for the inhabitants of Jerusalem, that being the Jews, and give them the name and citizenship of the Antiochians. Temples to the Greek gods and statues of Zeus littered the countryside. Each Greek home had its own set of idols, a patron god custom made for the family, as well as the whole set of sacrificial rites. Worst of all, Greek strongholds embraced all the terrible moral looseness of the Greek world. As time passed, more and more Jews not only spoke like the Greeks, but took on their customs, attitudes, and behaviors, which on so many levels were antithetical to the values of Judaism. Estimates that are that a 30 to 40% of the Jewish population became Hellenists. Most of the upper class was simply swept away by this tide of Hellenist thought. Some were no doubt simply ignorant of Jewish life and tradition. Others, however, became vicious self-haters. The Greeks found many willing collaborators among the Jews in their attempt to eradicate Judaism, Jason being one of them, again, and install the more enlightened pagan culture of theirs in Israel. These Hellenist Jews hated their brethren and openly sided with the enemies of Israel who attempted to destroy the Jewish nation and faith. They hated themselves for being Jewish and resorted to things like painful cosmetic surgery, not only to blend in better with the Greeks, but as a sign of defiance in their attempt to remove any trace of being Jewish from their bodies. Naturally, the victory of the Maccabees over the Greeks was a great disappointment to them. Jews true to Judaism were an increasingly shrinking island awash in the sea of Greek culture. They were victims of a cultural revolution that in a short time would have completely swamped them. However, historical events were at work which would give the besieged Jews an opening not only to stop the momentum of Greek culture, but reverse it and replace it with a brand new aspect of Jewish identity that would provide spiritual nourishment for countless generations in the future. That nourishment would become known to the posterity as the story of what's known as Hanukkah. But notice that this is the very influence that has our sisters dressing modestly, in my opinion, absolutely. Because what the heathen do is exactly what we do, and we follow right after, which is why it's written in Proverbs, you're not supposed to envy the ways of your oppressor. All right. Final article. Hellenism and Judaism, Palestine goes Greek. Looks familiar, just like the infrastructure at the White House. The Hellenistic period begins formally with the arrival of Alexander the Great in the Near East in 334 BCE, but this date is not the beginning of Greek influence in the region. The Near East as a whole, and Palestine and its Jewish residents more particularly, first came under the Aegean influence in the 14th century BCE. As trade connections increased, this influence became much more extensive. The cultural phenomenon that we call Hellenism had a lasting impact on Judaism and the Jewish people. Hellenism was a synthesis of the Greek Hellenic culture with the natives and cultures of the Near East. It was a dynamic phenomenon with the ever-evolving Hellenistic, Greek-like culture continually becoming the raw material for new synthesis with other native cultures not yet under its way. Greeks were not the first or main spreaders of the Greek culture. Indeed, it was not the Greeks themselves, but the Macedonians, Alexander and Philip, his father, whose civilization was a derivative from that of the true Hellenes, who were mainly responsible for spreading Greek culture to the Near East. As Hellenism penetrated each new region, an amalgamation of the Hellenistic with the native took place, and this phenomenon resulted in many different manifestations of Hellenistic culture observable in the Near East over many centuries. It was Alexander's conquest that made possible the union between the East and the West, but in fact there were deeper cultural reasons for the East with which these two civilizations entered into a symbiotic relationship. Greek culture had by this time developed to its pinnacle. It had been liberated from the limitations of geography, and one could now be a Hellene by education and culture, not just by birth. Humanism had resulted from the primacy attributed to reason in Greek thought. Man now was at the center of the cosmos rather than mere of the polis, which is a Greek city, as he had been earlier. I want to emphasize that one could now be a Hellene by education and culture. It's the same thing now within America. It's the same thing now. Right, Ganon, you see that? So concurrently, the native Near Eastern civilizations had run their course and were on the decline. Egypt and Mesopotamia apparently produced little or literary or intellectual import in this period, as the widespread interest in the new religions observable in the sources indicate a hunger for new means of spiritual fulfillment. The time was ripe for a new cultural movement, Thus, the peoples of the defeated Persian Empire could offer no more resistance to the Hellenic cultural onslaught than they had to the Macedonian army. I also want to say, too, Alexander and his top generals, if any of you have read about his life, he had actually endorsed his top men when he was amongst the Persians and amongst the other nations to amalgamate and marry women of their nations as a kind of sign to tie in the Greeks with all of the natives round about them. That's it on this. Oh, wait, no, I'm going to read this last one. On the city as crucible. The Greek city known as the polis was the vehicle for the assimilation and Hellenization of the indigenous peoples of the Near East. Newly found Greek cities, populated mostly by local people, were the cultural melting pots of the East. The institutions of the Greek way of life were open to all who wished to participate. The Greek language was rapidly adopted as a sign of Hellenization. People from surrounding areas streaming into the cities quickly gained the legal and economic advantages afforded by citizenship in the polis, exemption from certain customs and duties, and participation in the municipal government. In Greek cities, the upper classes of the Near East were acculturated through the schools and other institutions of the Hellenistic world. So all of you see how reading this, you see the same things amongst America today? Nothing is new under the sun. Again, this looks like the infrastructure in the White House. All right. All right. Time to stop sharing. So, with that being said and all this information being brought up, am I frozen?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. So, with that being said, in the presentation, the articles, definitely got a shout out and Save the Water to the Captain Yahawashi. His notes and what he had given me was also fundamental in this lesson, pertaining to bringing all this information forth. The backdrop and the historical understanding of what happened and what took place before we get to Maccabees is important so that we understand the stage of what we're reading. And not just that, but also to understand the society and environmental background of the New Testament and what took place and what occurred and happened so that we understand what we're reading. And the problem is that people do not read enough to actually properly intake and understand what was going on at the time and cannot simply understand and read in no context to properly break down and exegete the scriptures accordingly. So, again, before I forget, I'm going to send the presentation out. Let me send out the presentation to everyone. You guys can download it, view it. You have the breakdown, you have notes. Yes, sir, good night, yes, sir. All praises. So this Saturday, sundown will be the beginning of our Feast of Dedication, and class will be at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the Captain Yahawashi will be going into the Feast of Dedication on opening night to go into the story, and we may open and commemorate the feast, remembering and reading about what our ancestors that did and why we are commemorating and remembering and keeping this holy day. I am the bargain, huh? You know, you're a college student, so it's like it's not really anything for you. It makes sense out. Well, you're accustomed to that kind of formal education because everyone's a different learner. It's just better to use presentations as a way of helping everyone understand things in a much more visual manner. Did you send a presentation to the chat? Come. Sent them to both, so we should be good. Don't see one. It's in the announcements and songs, so you should get it. All right. Well, again, there will be no class Friday, but there will be a live stream Saturday. Again, Captain Yahawashi will be going into dedication. Saturday sundown will be the beginning of Feast of Dedication. Let me be sure I have. All right. Links been sent out to everyone. View back over the class for questions, comments, concerns. Reach me if anything. That being said, we'll conclude here. All right. That being said, Shalom Akim. Amadim Panyam Akwadam. Let's rise and face the east. This is Psalm chapter 1. Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. He shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. The ungodly are not so, but are like the chaff which the wind driveth away. Therefore the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knoweth the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish. In the name of Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahawashi, the Wadah Yad, Aman.
I mind him, Shabbat. I mind him. Barak. Yahweh Hashem, Yahawashi, Barak.
Yahweh Hashem, Yahawashi, Barak.
Nah,